There comes a time in every Mac's life when it can't cope with the stresses and strains of modern day strife. With no working updates and outdated hardware, connections are old and new software won't work. It's time to say goodbye and lay them to rest. But what you do now, and what you buy next? Mac Pro, Mac Mini, Mac Studio or MacBook, it's all so confusing, so let's take a look. I wasn't trying to make this rhyme, I wasn't trying to write poetry, so forgive me if it's a bit crap, and please don't have a go at me. I've just upgraded to the Mac Studio in my studio, and I thought I'd give you the benefit of my experience of plugging it all in and a bit of a comparison between the MacBook Pro 2016, the MacBook Pro M1 and the new Mac Studio, and maybe it'll help you make the decision between a MacBook Pro, a Mac Mini and a Mac Studio. And I bought the Max version, not the Ultra version. The Ultra version is essentially two of these in the same box. It's got two of the chips, but it's twice the price. It's £4,000, which is just completely out of my league. So this has got the same chip as the new Mac M1. So effectively, it's like a MacBook Pro M1 in a different box without a screen, but with a few more connections. And this is what I had before. It's a 2010 Mac Pro upgraded to 2012 spec. So it's the latest you could get before it went to the trash can, and this was great. It's got 4 bays for hard drives, which I use them all, which has been something that I've been considering when looking at the Mac Studio versus the Mac Mini. How do I plug everything in, including everything you can see around me, including things like my MIDI hubs, my universal audio interface, all that sort of stuff. This has been great for. In the back of this, I've got a couple of extra slots. I put in 2 PCIe or PCEI cards, whatever they're called, for additional USB. So in this, we've got 8, 9, 10, is it 11, and a couple in the front, so I have 13 USB inputs. So something like the Mac Mini, for example, with just 2 Thunderbolt ports and 2 USB ports, it would be really difficult to get everything working properly, I thought. But yeah, decided to upgrade because this was very noisy. Inside this has got an NVIDIA Radeon or something graphics card that's really noisy. It's got 2 big fans on it and it sounds like an aircraft taking off. And the minute I bought this, actually, I regretted it. But the guy I bought it off was dying of cancer, and I didn't want to say no and turn him around when he'd driven all the way across the country to, well, he said he was dying of cancer, but he'd driven all the way across the country to deliver it to me. So it's been a bit rubbish, to be honest, so I'm really pleased to have a new one that's quiet. The Mac Mini, as I say, was almost there, but just didn't have enough connectors. And if you look at this, it's essentially the same computer, but you get more options to upgrade the Mac Studio. The maximum memory you can get in the Mac Mini is 16 gig. In this, it's 128, but don't forget there's 2 MacBook Pros in this. And in the MacBook Pro, the maximum you can get is 64 gig. So essentially, this is just a much more upgradable version of both of those. And looking at the Mac Mini again with 1 terabyte, yeah, there you go. It's £1,300, so £700 cheaper than this. As I said earlier, we've got 2 Thunderbolt ports, 2 USB, I think they're USB 3 ports, plus an HDMI and an Ethernet. And that's it. There's nothing on the front whatsoever. So SD cards, for example, you're going to have to get an SD card reader. And once you add the SD card reader and a couple of monitors and the rest of it, there just doesn't seem to be enough ports. And I didn't want to buy it and find out it was limited. But if you don't have a lot of things to connect and you don't need a lot of ports, the Mac Mini is probably the one for you. But I went for this one. I got the upgraded GPU, which I would suggest you don't bother with, and I'll explain why in a minute when I do the CPU tests. I didn't go for the extra memory, mainly because it's £400. I do have 64 gig in the old Mac Pro, but I'm not sure I really needed that. It just sort of came with it. But I did decide for the 1 terabyte hard drive, as I explained earlier. So £2,400 in total, which is quite a fantastic amount of money. But when you look at what I've got around me, it just all needs to work. And with the Macs, I know it will. The first thing I looked at was system noise, because I'd uploaded a photo of it to my Facebook page saying, look, I've got myself a new computer, and a lot of people said, I thought it was noisy, I thought there was a high-pitched whine to it, I thought it wasn't great for in a studio. I hadn't noticed anything, so I decided to get, well, it was this mic, this Aston Spirit mic out, and do some tests with it. And here's the result of those tests. First thing I did was listen to it with nothing on, so nothing's on in the studio. I then turned on the Mac Studio, that's the second one, and I measured it up close, about 10 centimeters away. And then down here, I measured it at the listening position because it's underneath my desk. Then I turned on the hard drive external hard drive I bought, And then I put it up close to my old Mac Pro just so that you can see the difference. If you want to actually hear the sound, you're going to have to turn this up really quite loud. You can see these blobs here. That's where I start talking. And when I start talking, it will be a lot louder, but I've put it in as a reference really. So here we go. And this is how loud I am just talking into the mic in the same position. So you can still hear it, but this is how loud my voice is, just talking normally in the listening position. So you can hear there, the old Mac Pro was absolutely deafening. In comparison, the new Mac Studio is absolutely silent. And here I've used Isotope's RX9 to get a snapshot of the background noise. On the left is the nominal level, basically nothing's turned on. In the middle we've got close up to the Mac Studio, and on the right it's from the listening position, and you can see from the listening position it's not that much higher than the background sort of zero noise. And here we've got the hard drive close up on the left, got the hard drive from the listening position in the middle, and we've got on the right hand side the computer from the listening position. So you can see the hard drive itself, and the external hard drive I bought, is louder than the computer by a fair amount, so I end up turning that off. In fact, one of my lessons at the end of this will be don't buy one because they're just a bit rubbish. Then finally, just for reference, on the left's my old computer close up, and on the right is the Mac Studio close up, and you can see there's a huge difference in the noise from the two of them, can't you? But really the important one is this. On the left, everything's turned off in the studio, and on the right, the Mac Studio's turned on. Listening from the listening position, it's just so hard to hear anything. I think if you're doing a really quiet guitar, really quiet vocal, you're just not going to pick it up. As I'm sitting here now, I can hear it really faintly in the background, but you know, very, 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 very insignificant. Next up, I thought I'd do a quick CPU test to see how much I could handle. So I've put on here as many tracks as I could. I filled them up with stuff that I thought would probably use a fair amount of processing power. So I've put on a Focusrite from Brainworks, followed by the Softube Mutator, Softube Reverb. Again, more Softube. It's just basically what I've got installed on the computer, really. The Chandler Limited, again from Softube, and the Vertigo VSM3. Is this from Plugin Alliance? So a bit of distortion. And as I say, these are just things I think might take a fair bit of processing power. And then the Vice Limiter compressor. And they're all playing Alchemy. It's just a little couple of chords. And we can see there we've hit our limit on 23 tracks of this. Let's get rid of one of them. And it's meant to sound distorted, by the way, because we do have the distortion on it. So So we can cope with 22 tracks of that on this. On my M1 Mac, that's identical, and that's not surprising, and that's why I say it's probably not worth spending the extra £200 on the extra 16 cores of GPU, because I'm just not using it here. It's making no difference whatsoever, for music at least, or for music production at least. On my old 2016 MacBook Pro, I only got 6 channels. So this is over 3 times as powerful from this perspective. I know it's not a scientific test, but it just gives you some idea. And the 2016 MacBook Pro was just a tiny bit slower than the 2012 Mac Pro. Next up, connectivity. In my old MacBook Pro, as I said, I have 4 hard drives. One's a 1TB SSD that runs the whole system, and then I've got 3 other hard drives. One's a Time Machine, one does all my Logic stuff, and one contains all my large sample libraries. So I do need an awful lot of storage. They're all full, so I was concerned that I wasn't going to have storage. Bought this, and this is a little hard drive rack, it cost me £150. It's got 3 hard drives in it at the minute, and this was a mistake. It feels quite chunky and heavy. It's aluminium build. It feels nice, but once you plug it in, it starts buzzing and it starts rattling, and I have to put it on this, and it's a lot louder, as you heard in those tests, than the actual computer itself. So my recommendation would be, in this instance, get yourself a good USB hub and then use that to plug in quiet external drives. And this is the USB hub I bought. It's rack mounted, it's really heavy duty. It's a little bit of a pain that you've got to plug everything in at the front. I say a pain, but it'd be quite useful if a lot of it you could plug in at the back, but you can't. So it's a little bit untidy to look at, but with it being rack mountable and heavy duty, when you plug anything in or out of it, it doesn't move and you don't have cables falling out. Before I bought that, I bought this, but it just feels too lightweight. Nothing wrong with it. I've not even tried to plug it in. It just felt far too light. I said it was aluminium and good construction, but to be honest, having had a studio for years and plugging stuff in, plugging stuff out, I just know this is going to drop down behind things and just be a bit flimsy. But it may be of use to you to get something a little bit cheaper. This was about £55, but I just thought with all this stuff, I need something heavy duty. Other things I had to buy for connectivity were a Thunderbolt 2 to a Thunderbolt 3 port for my UAD Apollo. I needed a DVI to HDMI for my old 23-inch display, and I needed a mini DV to Thunderbolt 3 for my 27-inch. So those 3 in total, really cheap, about £30. But if you're going all in Mac, the keyboard will cost you £200 and the mouse will cost you about £100, this Magic Mouse. I didn't buy these particularly for this. I've had them for years. These have been Christmas presents, birthday presents over the years, so I never bought them. Well, the kids did, or my wife or someone. But yeah, if you're going to buy all these bits and bobs on top, it's taken the price from £2,400 to coming up to £3,000 actually. £150 for the hard drive, £130 for the USB hub, 30 quid on the other bits and bobs. That's £300 plus £300 is £600 plus £2,400 is £3,000. It all just worked flawlessly, plugged everything in, no problems whatsoever. Previously I'd had a PCs and I'd always had problems with drivers and stuff like that, and then people had just said to me, just buy a Mac or shut up. I bought a Mac, everything worked. I then plugged everything back into the PC to see what I needed to port over to the Mac. It took me a day to get that working, and then I put it back on the Mac and it all just worked again. And at that point I thought, oh yeah, Macs work. They're expensive, but they actually do what they say they do. I keep on going on about connectivity, but when you look at what I've got behind me, hopefully you can understand why. I've got a load of Dave Smith stuff, I've got the Tempest, I've got the, what's over there, the Prophet 6, got the OB6, all sorts of things. I've got just loads of bits and bobs, but they all require USB. And on this, you can see that everything that I've plugged in so far is just working. I've got 2 MIDI Express XTs from Mark of the Unicorn, plugged them in, no problem whatsoever. I had to download a driver for them, but Mark of the Unicorn are really good and everything just works. Plugged it in, no problem. Again, absolutely flawless. The other thing I had to consider was controllers. I've got the Softube console one and the fader pack. I think the Softube license manager automatically downloaded everything I needed. When I plugged it in, it just worked as well. My UAD Apollo was a Firewire version, but when I bought it, it came with a free Thunderbolt card. That's Thunderbolt 2, so I need a Thunderbolt 2 to Thunderbolt 3 adapter. But what you've got to remember is that you can only get 2 meter long Thunderbolt 2 cables. So just bear that in mind, because I thought I could do with a 3 meter cable or a 4 meter cable. So everything's had to be shifted around in the studio a little bit so that it can actually reach the UAD, which is sort of high up in a rack. Just worth noting, I suppose. The UAD needs to download its own firmware to work with Thunderbolt. I can't remember doing anything. I might have had to download it myself. It might have automatically happened. I can't remember. It was that uneventful. So that's working absolutely fine as well. So the last thing to talk about is software. I've installed the stuff I generally use all the time already, and I've had no problems whatsoever. There are a couple of things on Plugin Alliance that don't work, but I just dismiss the messages because I don't use them. I don't even know what they are. It's just not no issue to me. But I suppose if they're the things you use all the time, maybe you've got to download Rosetta or whatever. But Everything, as I say, is great. I haven't got rolling cloud on this yet. I do have rolling cloud on my M1 MacBook Pro, and I've had some issues with that, so that's not working flawlessly. It's for some reason it thinks stuff's installed that isn't installed, so I can't install it because it thinks it's installed, and I can't uninstall it because it's not installed. And Roland have been really helpful. They've sent me quite a few files and quite a few executables to do stuff, but it hasn't quite worked yet, so I need to chase that up. But I've not installed it on this one yet, so I might do an update on that. So finally, what have I learned? What are the takeaways? Well, number one, it's the exact same processor as the Mac Mini and the M1 MacBooks. Number two, it's a lot more expensive than a Mac Mini, and you're paying for upgrade capability that you might not need. You don't need a board that takes two of those processors. You don't need a board that's got 128 gig, or you can put 128 gig on. You're paying for somebody else to have access to that capability if you don't need it. I'm just annoyed I needed so many connectors, really. But working around that means spending more money on USB hubs, maybe extra connections. Number five, don't waste money on external hard drive enclosures. If you do need additional storage, you're better off to buy a quality USB hub. It's cheaper, and then you can buy external drives that are pretty much silent. Number six, don't upgrade the GPU if you're doing music. I'm just not seeing any benefit from it. So that was £200 wasted. Number seven, do upgrade the internal SSD. 1 terabyte is just about the bare minimum. 512 is an absolute pain. As I've said before, I've got a 512 2016 MacBook Pro, and I'm constantly plugging stuff in and out. So do yourself a favor, spend the £200 and get a minimum 1 terabyte SSD. Number eight, the power switch is located on the back, which is just insane. It's not an unattractive looking switch. Why it's not on the front by the white light is beyond me. So you got to reach around, particularly as I've got it sitting under a desk. Other people might have it on a shelf or even in a cupboard, because there's nothing to look at. Having to reach around to turn it on, and it's quite flush, so it's difficult to feel. I'll get used to it, but it just seems like a really, really strange decision. Number nine, I'm glad I bought it. I wish I could have bought the Mac Mini and saved myself about £1,000, but I just didn't have the confidence. I can see that thing sitting there for the next few years at least, and me getting an awful lot of use out of it. So I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere, and if it was, please subscribe, ring the bell, and maybe join me over on my Patreon page. It all helps to support the channel. This sort of stuff isn't all purchased by money I make off YouTube. The money I get on YouTube helps me to buy synths secondhand normally, do a demo, sell them, lose a bit of money, but the YouTube cash just about, well, it doesn't really cover it, to be honest. Patreon's a nice way of saying thanks, and of me being able to continue doing this without pumping cash into a black hole. So, I'll see you soon.